Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to another preview episode for the College Sports Hive. Leif and Scott Stevens back with you once again to take on another slate of games for the college football weekend. First off, we're just going to start off with some news for all of you that has happened since our news episode on Tuesday. It was really quite unfortunate. It was like a couple hours after we were done with our news episode. We got a lot of breaking news about these programs and game cancellations and everything like that. So we'll take a quick second to fill you all in on that. And then we have four interesting matchups that we're going to preview for you. None of them ranked, unfortunately. It's kind of a slower weekend for college football, but still matchups that are very intriguing. We'll start with number 2 Notre Dame is traveling to Boston College. Boston College gave Clemson every run that they could ask for and almost came away out of Death Valley with a win. So Notre Dame traveling into BC is an intriguing matchup. Arkansas has been playing really good football, and they're traveling to number 6 Florida to take on the Gators in the Swamp. So that's an intriguing matchup. We'll break down a little further for you. Number 9, Miami. We talked about them a little bit in our news episode this week with their ranking at number 9. They're traveling to Virginia Tech, and actually Virginia Tech is the favorite in that one. So that's an interesting point that we'll touch on once we get to that game. And then our last game that we'll preview for you is the ABC kickoff at 7:30 Eastern. Number 13, Wisconsin at Michigan. It's an intriguing matchup because Wisconsin is just coming off of COVID leave, Michigan sliding. So some things that could go both ways in those matchups. So as I touched on, we have some news that we'll start off with for this evening. Number 1, Alabama and LSU has been postponed due to COVID tests from the LSU side of things. We kind of touched on this as a possibility, didn't we, Leif?
Yeah, I mean, there was some writing on the wall on that one. We saw reports that LSU had a few positive tests, and we knew that they were going to err on the side of caution. And throughout the SEC, there's been a couple other cancellations, and this one was just they had some forewarning. And so at least we got this one right, but we're sorry we touched on a few games that won't actually end up happening this weekend.
Another game that won't happen is number 3 Ohio State will not play this weekend. They had a matchup slated against Maryland, and that has been canceled. The Big Ten isn't doing necessarily the postpone and makeup games. If there's COVID issues, the games are just flat out canceled because they don't have time to make them up, as the SEC built in more time for some of these games made up than the Big Ten did. That has been canceled due to positives for the Maryland Terrapins. Do we know anything else out of the Maryland camp as of right now?
No, it's just undisclosed as most of these are, and we don't even know the numbers. But I assume it's significant if they're shutting down this game, especially against the Buckeyes.
We touched on Texas A&M in our news episode that they had some issues with COVID this week, that they stopped their practices. We weren't sure necessarily what's going to happen to the game. A few hours after we finished our news episode, like I said, they did announce this game is postponed because it is in the SEC, so they will try and make it up at a later date. But that game against Tennessee is postponed due to Texas A&M COVIDs. And then of the last one is number 12, Georgia game has been postponed due to COVID issues for Missouri, which is kind of intriguing if you think about it, because you look at 2 weeks ago who Missouri took on, and it was Florida coming back from the Swamp, that was their first game back from COVID leave. So now we see some issues with Missouri. I don't know if I'm not saying that there's links between those two things, but it's an interesting storyline to develop if that would be the case.
Yeah, for sure. And there's even, and then another one in the SEC unranked is Mississippi State and Auburn as well. It has been postponed. So I think it's just going through, and they've had a particularly rough week or week prior where they've got these positive tests. And I don't know if there's any correlation being causation there, but it's certainly intriguing, and it would be interesting to see if they could draw a causation from that, and what would happen if that were the case.
So if you're not counting at home, we have you covered. That is 4 out of the top 12 teams that have had their games canceled or postponed this week, as well as number 4 Clemson's on bye. So that's 5 out of the top 12 teams that are off this week. So some shifting is in the cards for sure, and it leads to some alterations, in what we were anticipating for this week, but still some very good games to break down for you, and some teams that we haven't given as much time to as they probably deserve, like an Arkansas team, a Miami team, and Wisconsin with a bunch of their issues. So with that being said, we're going to jump right into our previews. We're going to start off with a game on ABC that kicks off at 3:30 Eastern time. Number 2, Notre Dame is traveling to Boston College. Notre Dame's favored at 86% chance of victory via the ESPN FPI. Do we kind of agree with that number, or do we think that's a little high?
I think it's a little high. I think Boston College is a good football team, and they gave Clemson all they could handle in Death Valley. And I think giving only 14% chance to a pretty good football team that's going to be gunning for the number 2 team in the country, I think that's a little high. But I think Notre Dame certainly is the favorite in this game. But they have a target on their back, and they've got to play every week from now on like they did against Clemson, or else everyone's going to give them their best shot.
Absolutely. Ian Book had a really great performance last week against Clemson. He did exactly what he needed to do. He threw for over 300 yards to keep that Notre Dame offense balanced and keep that Clemson defense kind of on their heels and guessing a little bit. What do we expect from him in this game? And is it safe to say that basically the remainder of how Notre Dame's success is based upon his performances in these last few games?
Yeah, for sure. And that's something that I was thinking while watching that Clemson game is this what we're going to see from Notre Dame the rest of the season? Are they going to throw more often? Because, I mean, they've played games where they've ran almost 70% of the time. And it almost felt archaic, but it works because they've got such a great offensive line. So I was wondering, if they pull this upset off, which they ended up doing against Clemson, are they going to keep showing Ian Book's like that Ian Book can do this and keep developing him, or are they just going to go right back to, hey, we're going to run you to death, control the line of scrimmage, and play good defense, which is a good recipe to win games, but I'm not sure it is the way to win big games, which you saw against Clemson. They needed both. So it'll be interesting to see if they change their formula up from what they did against Clemson back to just running the ball, or if they keep this thing and say, hey, we're all in on winning a championship. Let's keep developing Ian Book.
Absolutely. I think he's going to continue to improve. He had a great performance last week, but there's still some symbols of not necessarily like, yes, they beat the number 1 team in the country, but are they still able to come out and do what they need to do and dominate a team like Boston College? I think this is a huge opportunity for him to come out and say, look, I don't just like, I've had some issues coming out in the big games before, but also like I'm here to show that we're gonna dominate and have all of these performances moving forward to prove that we are the second best team in the country, above Ohio State and above some of these other teams that are on the outside looking in, and prove that they are the best, one of the best 4 teams in the country, even if a potential rematch comes with Clemson and they were to lose that game. So I think there's so much that rides on his performances throughout the rest of the year. But Kyron Williams is a great back. He's one of those guys that's like a very relied upon carrier of the football. So I think, like you touched on, they will remain balanced, but I think Ian Book's performances are going to be huge moving forward. Let's flip the script for a little bit. Let's talk about Phil Yurkovich. What do we think of Boston College's QB?
I think he's a solid player. I think against Clemson, you saw he was able to throw the ball around the yard and get pretty capable receivers involved. I mean, Yurkovich has 15 touchdowns to 4 interceptions, and they've played a pretty decently hard schedule so far. And they've got capable receivers. They've got Zay Bailey with 600 yards and 6 TDs, as well as C.J. Lewis, who came up with that juggling catch in the corner of the end zone against Clemson that we all saw. So I think this is a game where Notre Dame really can't sleep on the opponent. Like, they have to come out, like you said, against BYU and Boise State. This is a statement game. I don't think they need to crush them as much as BYU did against Boise State. But they need to say, hey, we're for real, and we didn't just have one good week, as you mentioned. But that said, I think Boston College presents challenge. Like, they present a real challenge to Notre Dame because they take care of the football and they have explosive weapons. I'm not sure they have enough weapons to win this game, but I think they really keep it close because they do have the weapons to score on big plays as well as churn out yards, because Yurkovich is a very competent quarterback.
Absolutely. I think you just touched on the fact that this is a potential trap game after such a great performance last week against Clemson. It's oftentimes very indicative when a team comes out and doesn't necessarily have their best performance. They're a little slow. They're a little like lackadaisical, I guess is a good word to describe how they perform in weeks after. Do we think we're going to see that out of Notre Dame, or do you think they're going to be ready to go for this one?
I think they have to be ready to go because they saw Boston College play Clemson the way they did. I think they know, like, wow, we escaped Clemson, and if Clemson escaped them, that means they're hot on our heels, and we've got a big fat target on our backs. And so I think Brian Kelly and company will be ready to go. But I don't think that necessarily gets them out of this game. Like, I think Boston College is one of the more underrated teams in the country, and you saw them against Clemson. They caused Clemson trouble. Like, they had the scoop and score from their own one, which was fortuitous. But more importantly, they were causing third and longs against a team like Clemson. If they can cause third and longs and make Ian Book have obvious passing downs, that's an entirely different game. So if their linebacking core and D line, their front seven can contain Notre Dame's offensive line, this makes this game very, very interesting. And I think they have a possibility of doing so. I don't think they'll be able to fully contain it, but they can neutralize it a little bit.
One last thing I kind of want to run by you is we touched on the fact that Boston College had a nearly flawless first half against Clemson. They did pretty much everything that they could have done correctly and to build that lead in the first half, and then were unable to sustain that in the second half against that talented Clemson team. Do we think that they have what it takes, I guess, to basically play that half of football again, to be in a chance to knock off the Fighting Irish, or are they going to come out and prove that was kind of a one-time deal? You know what I mean?
I think they have the weapons to do that for a bit. I think Notre Dame's they've got more veterans on their defense. So I think it'll be harder for them to do against Notre Dame, especially because they pulled some of those cards out and now it's on film. But I think what really was the difference in that Boston College Clemson game is they became complacent. If they're able to throw punches at 75% rather than at a perfect, flawless 100% first half, and then they put together a nice 75-75 first half, second half, that's almost better than an 100, 50. Like, they didn't play a great second half against Clemson. That's what allowed Clemson to come back, and they obviously have talent. But I think Notre Dame's more of a steady team. Clemson rides like highs, their highs and lows. So if they can fight with them through like steady lulls and play an even time of possession, that gives them a legitimate chance to win this game.
All right, everyone. That game's going to kick off for you on 3:30 Eastern time on ABC for you there. Let's transition a little bit into Arkansas at number 6, Florida. That's going to kick off at 7 p.m. Eastern on ESPN. 90% chance for Florida victory here via the ESPN FPI. Do we like those odds? Has Florida shown enough to deserve those dominating numbers?
I definitely think they're they're the favorite for sure. But I think it's interesting because this is a revenge game for Felipe Franks, the quarterback for Arkansas. He was supposed to be Florida's quarterback of the future not even very long ago at all. He's transferred, and he's having a really quietly great year at Arkansas. He's got 123 out of 183, nearly 15,000 yards, 14 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. And I mean, those are really good numbers in the SEC, especially playing against some legitimate teams. And I think he'll come out guns a-blazing, and this will be a high-scoring game.
Absolutely. It's very interesting. You brought up a very good point about how Felipe Franks is going to be going back into the swamp where he was the guy, and then some interesting situations played out, and he was almost booed out of there in a way. So some issues there, but that led to Kyle Trask emerging as the guy for the University of Florida. He's having a tremendous season, a front runner for the Heisman Trophy, or at least in the conversation that needs to be had. He's 120. Geez Louise, 125 of 182 for completions. He has 1,815 yards if I can ever get through this, and then 22 touchdowns. What do we think of his performance so far this season, and can he continue to build on that against an Arkansas team that is sneaky good?
I mean, I think they're both going to put up tons of points. So yes, I think Kyle Trask is just going to add to those numbers. A crazy thing about Trask is he's thrown for at least 4 touchdowns every single game he's played, and his high of 6 touchdowns in a game. Neither of these two teams are very good defensively. This is not going to be a defensive slugfest. Arkansas gives up 401.5 yards per game, and Florida gives up 402 per game. So very equally matched there. And if you think about that, that's 4 football fields up and back, and then you get touchbacks. You start at the 25. There's going to be some touchdowns in this game, and both offenses are above average. So I virtually guarantee Kyle Trask gives you another monster game and helps his Heisman campaign. Like, I mean, he's only got 3 interceptions and he's only been sacked 5 times. They're keeping him upright, and if you keep him upright, he's going to throw you some touchdowns. So I'm all aboard the Kyle Trask train, and I think they're going to win this game, and he's going to put up some crazy good numbers again.
I agree. I think you made some really good points, but I think one thing to really take into consideration here is that Kyle Pitts, their star tight end, is questionable after that concussion due to that hit that he sustained last weekend against Georgia. So I think if he's unable to go, that really changes the dynamic of that offense and those playmakers. That's one less very reliable target for him to make throws to. That hit happened in the first half, so it showed that they were still able to score points without Kyle Pitts. But I think you can't really replace a talent like that. We've touched on this with injuries before, such as Jalen Waddle and things that have happened already this season. You can't replace that kind of talent. It just demands that someone else steps up and fills in some of that role a little bit. So I think that's going to be really imperative for Florida. If Pitts is able to go, then I think they're going to really dominate the football game. But I think if he's unable to go, then someone else is going to have to step up. And if that doesn't happen, then Florida could be in trouble if they don't have enough plays. I'm not sure Arkansas is going to be able to play enough defense though to stop Florida in that potent offense. Do you think so?
Yeah, no, I think with or without Pitts, Florida's going to put up points. Like that, to me, that's for sure going to happen. We saw last week, Pitts was, entering any game, I guarantee you if you ask an opposing coach in the SEC, who's the guy you want to take away on Florida's roster, they're going to point at number 84, Kyle Pitts. So without him, without preparing for him, like if they say, oh, he's not going to play, if they get word of that or they think he's not going to play, that shifts the focus, and then it'll make it harder for Trask to hit secondary options, which he does so well because of the focus that most teams put on Pitts. But that said, he had 4 receivers score touchdowns last week. One of them was Pitts, and then the 2 main yard getters last week didn't score touchdowns. So that shows he has 6 receivers that are very competent, as well as a pretty solid running back in Dameon Pierce that I don't think gets enough love. I mean, he doesn't score the ball that much just because they have such a dynamic quarterback in Trask, but he's productive. And against Arkansas, they don't stop the run very well at all. They give up 180 yards per game on the ground. So I think they'll be able to score the ball with or without Pitts, but I certainly hope he's able to play. He's the best tight end in college football. He's electric.
Absolutely. I want to run 2 more things by you about this game, and they're kind of very similar. We touched on the fact that this is Felipe Franks coming back to the swamp, back to the Florida program where he spent so much time and led that offense for a while. Do you think there's an advantage on either side with that happening, with a quarterback that knows the Florida system coming back and saying, this is what we have to prepare for with what Florida might do to us? Or is there more of an advantage on the Florida side of knowing what Felipe Franks is able to do at quarterback and the things that they might try and do based around him at that position? Do you think there's an advantage either way, or do you think they're going to change enough that the schemes are different enough that they're going to kind of negate those advantages?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I think the answer, though, is advantage Felipe Franks, just because if you know an offense, you can relay that to a defensive coordinator and say, like, oh, these are some tendencies of the offensive play caller and stuff like that. Whereas Arkansas's offense is still new. Felipe Franks has been there just in the few games they've played this season. And so I don't think Florida coaches are going to be like, oh, Felipe Franks he's not able to do this in the structure of this offense. Especially because Franks, his main failure at Florida, not that was a failure as a stay, but his shortcoming, I should say, was just bad decisions. But you can't bank on poor decisions because he's got an absolute howitzer of an arm. He throws the ball so well in terms of talent and potential. So they can't say, oh, we're going to let him throw over the top. That's not going to work. So I think, and he's just going to come out guns a-blazing. I always like the old revenge game type of stories. So I think it's advantage Franks, but that's an interesting question. I wonder if Florida knows more than what I know about that.
Yeah, it's going to be really interesting. I think you touched on the decision-making of Felipe Franks. I think that's going to be a massive point in this game. I think if you're Arkansas, you cannot turn the ball over. You're going into the swamp. There's going to be fans. It's the SEC. You can't turn the ball over. You have to play smart offense, but you have to also score points. So there's going to be a good balance of trying to push the ball down the field and score, but also you're going to have to take care of the ball, because if you give Florida more possessions, you're going to be fighting an uphill battle early and often, and that's not going to necessarily lead to a whole lot of success for our Arkansas team. But if they can kind of come out with like establish their presence on the field, have some scoring drives, and keep up with Florida throughout the first half, I think they're going to put themselves into position where this is going to be a really intriguing matchup down the stretch. But with that being said, Felipe Franks absolutely has to take care of the football and cannot give Florida more possessions, because I think Kyle Trask and that Florida offense will capitalize on pretty much any opportunity that they can get.
Absolutely.
So let's transition back to the ACC for a minute. One last footnote: that game is at 7 p.m. That's Eastern time. It's going to kick off on ESPN. So make sure to tune into that one. We'll transition back to the ACC. Number 9 Miami. We touched on them in their ranking above a couple teams that we felt like they might not be necessarily deserving of being ahead of. They travel to Virginia Tech this weekend, who is coming off of a kind of embarrassing loss for a Power 5 conference, I might say, to Liberty. So that's something that is very intriguing to look at. But also, what's more impressive to me is Virginia Tech has a 68.5% chance to win this football game via the ESPN 50 FPI, and the spread is -2 in favor of Virginia Tech. What do we make of these numbers, and why do we necessarily think the ESPN people see what they see in the betting lines and stuff like that?
To me, I think it's misleading, because you see number 9 Miami, and this is what we talked about in the news episode, is that their ranking, it seemed undeserved at the time, and this is their real chance to come out and get that. I think Virginia Tech is a really good football team that's just had. I mean, they had some bad breaks. They actually blocked the kick that they ended up losing on, and they iced themselves basically. So there's some bad turns, but Liberty's a good football team. They upset them, and they've got talent. So I think it's an interesting game. This is a real prove-it game, especially for Derek King, the quarterback for Miami. He's a sneaky Heisman contender. He's kind of an electric player. I don't think he's really in the race, but he's on the fringe contenders. He might appear on some ballots. He's got 16 touchdowns, 4 interceptions, and slightly over 1,800. Why is it hard to read these things? 1,800 yards. And they're a really good offense, but their wins on the road recently is probably why they're the underdog. They've squeaked out tiny little wins against opponents that they should have beaten handily. They won by 5 over Virginia and by 3 over NC State, and they have not been very good on the road.
An interesting parallel in this game is Derek King and Kyle Trask, the quarterback for Florida, were teammates at the same high school, and so Derek King was the starter for the high school team, and then Kyle Trask was kind of his backup and in the shadow a little bit. So now you have these two quarterbacks who both have over 1,800 yards passing already in this college football season, and they're both at very dynamic and powerful schools here in Florida. So it's very intriguing to see how that kind of played out for both of them and see them both balling out now. You don't necessarily see that from the same high school. So kind of a crazy little anecdote to add in there as well. I think the key here for Virginia Tech is to manage this game on a very slow paced schedule. They're not dynamic in the passing game. Their quarterback only has 98 passing attempts through 7 games. That's very low. He only has 870 yards, 7 touchdowns, and 3 interceptions. So if you're expecting Virginia Tech to go out and throw the ball all over the field, that's just not what they do, and that's not going to be their formula for success. They're going to have to try and limit Derek King's possessions and keep him off of the field with long drives, dominate the time of possession, dominate the offensive and defensive lines. And if they can't do any of that, I just don't necessarily see a path to victory for Virginia Tech, because they're so unexplosive in a way in the passing game. So if they can come out and prove me wrong and throw the ball with success, then that would be very, very interesting to watch. But as on paper, as of right now, it just seems like they have to play that slow, methodical, Wisconsin type style game of the past where they just dominate you physically. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. And I don't know if they can. I mean, Miami's got athletes. Like, that's never been a question. It's sometimes they lack discipline and coaching, but this year they seem to be more in tune and they get after the passer. I think an interesting matchup is that offensive line versus Gregory Rousseau, the defensive end for Miami. He's the stud. Will be a first-round pick this year. and he's very extremely talented. Like, he can change a game in a flash. And then the other big playmaker that I wanted to highlight that I don't think is getting enough recognition is Caleb Farley of Virginia Tech. He's the cornerback, and his matchup against Mike Harley. So Harley versus Farley out on the flanks. He'll be guarding. Farley will be guarding Harley. Harley has 4 touchdowns and nearly 500 yards for Miami, and I think whoever wins that matchup could very well win the game.
So my question to you is, how is this Virginia Tech – we kind of talked about this, but how are they favored after coming into a bad loss against Liberty where it was this Liberty team who is 8-0, I think, moving into 9-0, something like that. And then they beat this Power 5 team, their biggest game of the season for Liberty. But then you look at what Virginia Tech's done on the season, and they've beat Boston College 40-14. Like, that's no small feat. We just touched on Boston College played Clemson extremely well, and we're anticipating them on playing Notre Dame very well. So it's one of those kind of things in college football where things can shift and there's ebbs and flows that aren't necessarily very explainable. But I just think it's still very surprising that this Virginia Tech team is coming in as the favorite to this game. But I think one of the biggest keys to the game will be the Miami defense. I think whoever they, like you touched on, they have so many athletes, but so many times we've seen them be undisciplined. If they're disciplined, if they're fast and they play free and loose and they kind of embrace that whole turnover chain model that they built down there in Miami, then I don't think Virginia Tech has a chance if that happens. If they're flying around the field and making plays, stopping the run and making them throw to beat them, I don't see how it's possible for Tech to have success. But what do you make of all that?
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree. I think this game really comes down to, can Virginia Tech throw the ball? Because if Miami loads up the box and makes them throw, I'm not sure I believe in their quarterback play. Like, they're typically in these type of things, there's a reason that teams want to disguise. And like, a perfect example would have been Stanford versus Oregon. We've talked about this game and how Jack West, they hid the playbook. They didn't trust him to throw, and they settled for field goals, which didn't work. And I don't think that type of scheme will work against Miami either. They're an explosive offense, and you're going to need to throw the ball and get yards through the air, not only on the ground, because if you put 8 in a box, there's only so much a running back and offensive line can do. So I agree with you. I think Miami has the capacity to be favorites in this game. I think Virginia Tech's going to want to get back for an embarrassing loss, as you said, and they're playing at home. There are fans in the ACC, so that may help them, and that could help why it's 68%. But I agree with you. I think on paper this matchup should favor Miami.
I think if I'm Miami, I'm also a little peeved. I'm a little angry. I'm a little upset of what I'm seeing here. I think it's a little disrespectful to the number 9 team in the country to have them be underdogs to this Virginia Tech team. But I do see some of the logic behind it. I just think this is an absolutely massive game for Miami. I think if they come out and they dominate this Virginia Tech team and they show that they can handle going into, like you touched on, which is probably going to be a decently hostile environment for 2020 standards, and play a very solid, complete football game, they'll prove their legitimacy in the top 10. But I think if they continue to squeak out wins and have subpar performances, I think that they're going to see themselves fall behind teams such as Indiana, such as Georgia, even with 2 losses that we both touched on, think that is probably a better football team than Miami, and Oregon, who's going to continue to play, and if they continue to go undefeated and win football games. So there's a lot of people behind them looking at this Miami team going, you know what I mean? So I think it's absolutely a massive game for them to come out and prove their legitimacy, and we'll see. I guess we'll just see if they're able to do that.
And they have a lot to play for. They also play Notre Dame coming up, and that was thought, like, people anticipated Clemson would beat Notre Dame, and that was going to be who played Clemson in the title game. Notre Dame obviously won that game, but Miami still has a lot to play for. They can prove, hey, we're a really good football team if they come out, take care of business here, and then play Notre Dame. And if you can beat or play Notre Dame tight, that really speaks to something. So I think neither team is lacking for motivation, and it should be an interesting football game. I expect it to be a really close one.
That's going to be at noon Eastern time for all of you there. That's going to kick off on ESPN. Speaking of having a lot to play for, let's talk about Michigan. I mean, they're coming into this game now at 1-2 on the season after 2 back-to-back losses. A lot of grumbling around what's happening there in Ann Arbor under Jim Harbaugh. This is a program that's established, is supposed to win 9-10 football games a season. So they take on number 13 Wisconsin in the Big House. That's going to kick off at 7:30 Eastern time. That's Kirk Herbstreit and Chris Fowler on the call. But they're still giving Wisconsin an 87.3% chance of victory via the FPI. So that's a pretty big margin, but the spread's only at 4.5 in favor of Wisconsin. What do we make of all those statistics?
Well, I think it's kind of weird because Florida had a 90% chance and they're favored to win by 17.5. So I don't know. I don't know what the logic is. I don't question the people in Vegas. They know what they're doing. One thing I do question, and this is a little funny anecdote. I've noticed Michigan, Jim Harbaugh decided, I'm going to stop wearing khakis. In the last 2 games, they've been blown out. I wonder if he wants to keep his job. He puts on some khakis, and they come to play. But in reality, I think this is a really interesting game because Wisconsin played a great game. Like, they played one of the most perfect games that they've played in years against Illinois. And granted, Illinois is not very good. They're 0-3. But they came out won 45-7 on opening night, and they had a starting quarterback in Graham Mertz who'd never played before, and then they still had their dominant offensive line and great running game, with 3 competent backs that will hit the big play and churn out yards. That said, they just had a huge COVID thing, and they still have 5 players. We don't know who, but it could be important players that are not able to play. So, there's a lot of storylines heading to this game, and probably the one that's going to steal the headlines is Jim Harbaugh going to keep his job? But I think the bigger thing is who comes out to play, because neither team has exactly been great in Michigan's case, and Wisconsin hasn't been able to play.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an identity game for both teams a little bit. I think for Michigan, we touched on their last week's game against, oh my goodness, it's going to slip my brain who they played. Oh, Indiana, excuse me. And we touched on that they needed to get back to their identity of running the football and dominating time of possession and playing Jim Harbaugh football and relying on Joe Milton to extend drives when he needs to, but not win the game with his arm. So I think it's a very intriguing identity game for both teams, because if you're Wisconsin, you're not necessarily sure what you're going to get. People are probably going to be a little out of shape. They've been off for a month. It's going to be interesting to see which Wisconsin team comes out. We're not even sure which 5 people still have COVID, so that could be a really big impact on who's even on the field for this team. So a lot of intriguing storylines. What do we think Michigan has to do to hang with Wisconsin in this matchup?
I think they just need to have a close to equal time of possession, which effectively means, for those of you who don't know, it means running the ball. I think they need to establish the run and don't abandon it just because in the first possession it didn't work. And that's what they seem to have done recently. And they came out in a horribly undisciplined game where their defensive errors caused touchdowns with penalties and stuff. But the bigger issue is that they tried to make Joe Milton throw a ton. I mean, he threw 51 times against Michigan State, and then he threw 34 times and ran a bunch where he was supposed to throw more against Indiana. They need to have an almost 50-50, if not 50-50 run pass split, and keep the ball out of Wisconsin's hands, who's more explosive than they typically are and usually dominate time of possession. So that's really important. And they're missing their 2 best pass rushers. So I think they even more so need to keep the ball in their hands rather than let Graham Mertz and the running game of Wisconsin get going.
Absolutely. We touched on those injuries in our news episode earlier this week. What can we expect from Wisconsin after their long layoff? And do we think they're going to do you agree with me that they're going to have some rust? They're going to have some issues on both sides of the football, kind of readapting to playing in a real live football game again? Because it was only earlier this week that they started up some light football activities.
Yeah, I think they're going to have some rust. I think that's only natural, and I think some players will be out of shape. It's hard to maintain football shape in general, much less missing 3.5 weeks. But I think Paul Chryst and the Wisconsin team is one of the more disciplined teams in the country. They have the reputation of being kind of like blue collar. They know what you're going to get. And so I expect they'll come out at least schematically sharp, and they won't have silly errors. They're one of those teams that you kind of know what you're going to get. offensively and defensively. Fitness-wise, that could be an issue, but I think they'll at least schematically be sharp and come out to play this game to win this game.
I agree. I think they'll be schematically ready to play, but there's a big difference between practice shape and game shape. So especially if you're relying on winning the game in the trenches, I think it's a huge issue if your linemen are out of game shape and then they're not able to go and say your defense. You say Michigan has a few drives where they keep their Wisconsin defense out on the field for a while, and the defense gets super tired and people go out with cramps and things happen, and that can be a way that Michigan can stay in this game if they're able to dominate on offense and move the ball via the ground and the pass with an even split like we touched on. If you were to pick one thing in this game that would be a difference to you, what would it be?
I think it's just Wisconsin runs the ball so effectively year in and year out. I mean, the past 3 years they had Jonathan Taylor, who won the Doak Walker Award 2 out of the last 3 years, and even as a freshman ran for 1,800 yards. In his past 2 years, over 2,000. So they don't have him, but they've got 3 really good running backs headlined by Nakia Watson. And I just think that they trust their run game and they know, hey, this formula works. We get an added bonus if Graham Mertz is in the game, first of all, because he did contract coronavirus. And so if he plays, if Graham Mertz is around slinging the ball like he did 20 of 21, which I don't expect to happen again, obviously, but effectively, that's an added bonus because we know we can win just by running the ball. And then I think their defense is very sound as well. I think they're the most, like, if you think Big Ten football, obviously you think Ohio State, but to me, what encapsulates Big Ten football is Wisconsin. They're the identity of like Midwest. They're going to run you dead. And I think just the fact that they're willing to keep with their program and Michigan is lacking an identity is the biggest difference.
For sure. I completely agree. That game kicks off at 7:30 p.m. Eastern time on ABC. Make sure to tune into that one. It's gonna be a good one for sure. The last segment we're gonna have for you all this evening is our picks. As always for Thursday, we have a slightly longer list of picks than the games we've previewed, just to pick a couple extra games for you. But we're gonna delve into some of these. We're gonna start off with Arkansas traveling to number 6 Florida, one of the games we previewed. Who you got?
I think it would be silly to pick against Florida right now. They're playing really good football. They're scoring at a very high rate, and Kyle Trask to me is probably second or third in the Heisman race right now, and is only looking for more. So I'm going Florida.
Yeah, I'm going Florida as well. I don't necessarily think this game is as close as a lot of people think it will be. I know Arkansas is playing good football. They're well coached. Felipe Franks is on his revenge game. And that usually means when someone leaves and comes back and plays that game, they have so much expectation, so much pressure. They usually can't necessarily live up to it. I've seen it happen before with different scenarios. So I'm going to tend to lean with the Florida offense and how explosive they are. But if there is no Kyle Pitts, I think it's going to be a much better and closer game than it would be if Kyle Pitts is healthy and playing. So it's going to be a good one regardless, but I'm going Florida as well with you. Number 9, Miami traveling to Virginia Tech, another one that we touched on for all of you. Who you got there?
I think in a close, I'm gonna go with Miami. I think they just have a better offense and their defense has enough potential to get stops, whereas Virginia Tech is so reliant on their defense getting stops, and their offense doesn't seem like it's very electric by any means. So I'm gonna go with Miami. I think this will be a close one. I think the biggest factor is who can create turnovers in that game.
I have Miami written down on the docket, but I'm going with the experts. I'm going to flip the script on myself and go with Virginia Tech. I don't know why, but it's one of those gut things that says Virginia Tech is going to be able to come ready to play. It's a noon kick. I'm not necessarily sold on Miami as a top 10 team to begin with. They've had a lot of underwhelming performances the past few weeks. So I'm going Virginia Tech to bounce back after a dreadful loss to Liberty. They're going to come back ready to play, and they're going to take down number 9 Miami. Maybe. We'll see. I don't know.
That wouldn't surprise me. That wouldn't surprise me. Like I told you, I brought it up in the news episode. I didn't think they earned that 9 spot at all. I don't know why I'm taking them. I just think I think they've got more offensive firepower. And as a wise man once told me, aka yourself, offense wins in college football.
This is very true. You're making me doubt myself. But anyway, I'm sticking with Virginia Tech. Let's move on to a game a program that had a game canceled last week due to COVID. It looks like they're going to have enough players. The University of Utah looks like they said they're going to squeak in there at 56, 57-ish scholarship players to be able to play this game this weekend against UCLA. It's one of those things that's very intriguing. Who you got in this one against Utah and UCLA?
I do attend the University of Utah, but I wouldn't consider myself a diehard fan, so this doesn't hurt me too much. I think UCLA is going to win just because they recruit well. Chip Kelly's he's an innovative coach. They can score with Dorian Thompson-Robinson at quarterback, and they have enough talent on defense, and they're available. Chip Kelly had a release saying they have 0 players with COVID issues. Kyle Whittingham in a release a few days ago said the Utes have 2 position groups decimated by injuries. I have no idea which groups these are, but I'm gonna say that UCLA is gonna win due to availability. So don't hate me too much, Utah fans, but that's my pick.
No, absolutely. I think there's a lot of grounds to stand on in that one. Dorian Thompson-Robinson is almost nightmare fuel for Utah fans in their first matchup of the season with all of that they replaced on defense. I think if you're UCLA, you are licking your chops as to what this is going to entail with taking on a very shorthanded Utah team. With that being said, I don't think wide receiver is a position that's going to be decimated for Utah. I think that's the strength of their team, and I think they have experience or talent, whichever way they lean, with Jake Bentley or Cam Rising at quarterback. So I'm going to stick with Utah, and I'm going to hope and pray that wide receiver or running back isn't one of the positions that's decimated. But I think this is going to be a very fun game to watch, mostly because Utah isn't at full strength, and UCLA is one of those teams that is always sneaky good, and Chip Kelly's very up to the task to steal one away from the Utes for sure.
I got a quick follow-up question for you. Yeah. Who do you think starts at quarterback for Utah? And secondly, what position would be the worst if it were a position group? Okay, excluding quarterback. What position group would be the worst to be fully decimated for the Utes, excluding quarterback? And who do you think starts at quarterback?
So I think Cam's going to start just because it's kind of a freebie year eligibility-wise. And I feel for Jake Bentley. I think he came in here with expectations that he was going to be the starter, but I think if you're the University of Utah, it makes the most sense if you go with the guy that's going to be your projected future for the next couple of years, and that is Cam Rising. So I think you get him the experience that he needs. But I think the most detrimental position that would be decimated for the University of Utah would be the secondary. They replaced probably their best secondary they've had in a very long time. Julian Blackman, Terrell Burgess, Jalen Johnson, all of these guys that aren't there anymore. They signed one of their biggest recruits to flip them from Ohio State, Clark Phillips III. Yeah. See, I've been doing so much other football, I'm kind of losing my Utah knowledge. But anyway, I think if they have a lot of people out in the secondary, they're shorthanded to begin with there. So if they're decimated there, it's going to be a long night for the Utes because Dorian Thompson-Robinson is going to have a field day because that guy is a stud.
I agree. I agree with both things. I think Cam, first of all, the little anecdote here is I've played basketball with Cam, and I think he's a really cool guy, so I'm rooting for him. 2, he throws the ball better than Jake Bentley. I randomly stumbled upon the Utes this summer when I was just running on a track. I saw them throwing the ball, and I was like, hey, I know those guys. And I think he's a better throw of the football. So, and like your eligibility thing's 100% spot on. You want to go with the free eligibility with more talent. I agree with you. I think it's either defensive line or secondary is the group you cannot afford to be decimated. The secondary is already starting 2 true freshmen in Clark Phillips III and safety Nate Ritchie. So I don't think you can afford to go any deeper in that group. And then defensive line is just you want to be stout up front. That's what Utah's always good at. So you can't lose that. But who knows which group it'll be.
Man, you're going to make me pick UCLA, aren't you? But no, I'm going to stick with the Utes, and I just think Coach Witt and company gets it done. Morgan Scalley, that they come prepared to play, especially after kind of the letdown of not playing last weekend. So that's Utah UCLA. It's going to be a fun one there in the Pac-12 after dark slot there. Number 10, Indiana is traveling to Michigan State, who has been probably the most hot or cold team in the Big Ten this year, losing to Rutgers, beating Michigan, and then and then losing to Iowa badly last week. So who you got in this Indiana-Michigan State matchup?
I've been doubting Indiana and Tom Allen, but I think this is the week I go with them, and I really hope they don't just lay an egg on me, because I've doubted them twice and they've beaten me twice. So let's go Hoosiers.
Yeah, I'm rolling with Indiana. I think Penix is I'm more high on Penix than you are, in my opinion. I just think he's one of those heartbeat players that team really relies upon. But I think their defense is good and can slow down Michigan State as well. So I'm going Hoosiers. Coastal Carolina at Troy. First time we're picking the Coastal Carolina game. Are you going against them?
I think they're legitimately a good football team. Like last week, they held a team that was solid to 6 points, and they won in a scrappier game. And then the week before, they won 51-0. So I'm taking Coastal Carolina. I'm rolling with them again.
Yeah, I'm going Coastal as well in that one. Number 11, Oregon at Washington State. It's another fun one in the Pac-12 to look at.
This is a weird game because when I think Washington State, all I know is Mike Leach. As you guys can tell, I'm a big Pac-12 guy, and I can't imagine a team that doesn't have 70 throws and maybe 2 runs. So it'll be interesting. I still think Oregon's going to win. I think Mario Cristobal is building something really impressive at Oregon. They run the ball even with losing their 5 offensive linemen. They have Joe Moorhead, who you brought up. I loved their offensive scheme, getting Tyler Shough running the ball, and CJ Verdell's a monster. So I'm going Oregon. Yeah,
I'm going Oregon as well, and I don't think it's necessarily as close as a lot of people think it is. I think Washington State's going to be searching for their identity there. A sneaky team in the Big Ten, ranked in the top 25 this weekend, is 3-0 Northwestern. They're traveling to 2-0 Purdue. Who do we have in this intriguing matchup in the Big Ten, which apparently I don't want to pick because it's not written down?
I'm gonna go Northwestern. I just trust their football team more. I think Pat Fitzgerald, the coach of Northwestern, does a good job up there consistently. They run the ball well. They play solid defense. I think this will be a low-scoring game, so it's not going to be a blowout by any means, in my opinion. But I trust them a little more, especially because I think Purdue is without their receiver, Rondale Moore. I'm not positive about that, though.
Yep, I'm going Northwestern as well. I think I've been impressed by their quarterback. I think, like you touched on, their offense kind of has that old style, a little bit run the football, but he has more potential to make the throws than Northwestern quarterbacks in the past. And I like Pat Fitzgerald. I think he's a good coach, and I think he's built a program that is commendable up there in Northwestern. So I'm going to go with them as well to improve to 4 now. Number 20, USC at Arizona. Do we think the Trojans have any issue there with the Wildcats?
I don't think so. I think USC is really relieved that they came out and beat Arizona State when they were outplayed. I think Keaton Slovis had one of the worst games of his career, honestly. Like, he just didn't throw well. He didn't look comfortable. And Arizona State was a far better team than Arizona. And so I'm going on USC.
It's a tough one to judge because Arizona didn't play. They were supposed to play Utah last week. That game got canceled. So a little shift and change. You never know how it's going to affect a program. They haven't played yet this year, so this is now their first game of the season. But back-to-back games for the Trojans against the Arizona teams. I think they sweep the Arizona teams, and I'm going USC as well in this one. We'll move on to our duo of games of the week. We chose to go with number 2 Notre Dame and traveling to Boston College. So we'll give our pick and then a score for this one, and we got one more for you as well after this.
I think Notre Dame pulls it out, but I don't think it's pretty. I think it'll be a tough matchup, and they'll be in control at the end, and Boston College will be fighting, but won't have enough. So I'm going 30-24 Notre Dame.
I like it. This is a coin flip game for me. It's just one of those things that you never know how one of those massive moments for Notre Dame is going to affect them, if it's going to be a positive or a negative for them. They've come out and played down to their level of competition a couple times so far this season. So if they do that with Boston College has every potential chance to win this football game. And with that being said, I'm just going to go ahead and put it out there that Boston College beats Notre Dame. They're going to win 31-28. They're going to kick a field goal, and they're going to win the game. They're going to knock off the number 2 team in the land. And it's just they're going to catch Notre Dame in that kind of sleeper scenario. And I just think Boston College has the talent to get it done, to move the ball.
I love that pick. I thought about doing it, and I just think they're going to run too much, but I love that pick. I really think this is going to be a great game.
It's going to be a fun one for sure. Our second co-game of the week for all of you this weekend is going to be number 13, Wisconsin, traveling to the Big House to take on Michigan. Michigan is in an avalanche of a slide down the mountain. They're kind of lost their identity. Wisconsin, we have no idea what's going to happen after coming back from COVID leave. What do you got happening here in Ann Arbor this weekend at 7:30 Eastern?
Well, assuming that Graham Mertz plays, I think Wisconsin wins fairly handily. The only way they don't is if Jim Harbaugh brings out his cleanest pair of khakis, and I don't think he does. So I'm going Wisconsin 37-24.
I'm going to go with you as well. I like the way Wisconsin played. It just really worries me to make this pick not really knowing who those 5 kids are that are still out with COVID. I'm going Wisconsin 30-28. I think it's going to be a great game. I think it's going to be one of the closest primetime games that we see this season. It's just one of those scenarios where I touched on Michigan had a chance to really stop the backward momentum last week and flow it in the right direction to have a really good performance. I think they do have a better performance in this game. I think they compete. I think they play hard. They're more disciplined on both sides of the ball, but I just think Wisconsin has the more talented roster. So with Graham Mertz, like you touched on, I'm going Wisco in this one 30-28.
I hope so. I'd be sad because Michigan, I picked them again after they lost. I picked Minnesota. They beat me. Then I picked them. I was like, okay, their backs against the wall against Indiana. They laid an absolute egg, and I just don't see them beating Wisconsin. But, like, I feel like they've got a push left. Maybe it'll be against Ohio State this year. How funny would that be? Like, Harbaugh's given up, and then they're like, hey, we're going to beat Ohio State. Like,
yeah. Things like that happen all the time in college football. So it's going to be one of those really, really intriguing things to see what happens with this Wisconsin team if they're ready to play come Saturday night. But I think they will be, and I'm going to stick with the Badgers. That's going to do it for Leif and I this evening. That's our preview for you this week. Stay tuned for some updates. We might delve into some college basketball stuff because that's right around the corner for everyone. This is a very inclusive college sports podcast. It's not necessarily just football. Football is the only thing currently running, so that's really our only talking point. But as college basketball begins to come into the fold, we are going to present you some different things. So we might have some updates on what's happening there, and get the ball rolling in terms of that. So stay tuned. We'll make sure to announce on our social medias when we're gonna release that episode, because it might not necessarily be on an exact day for one of these episodes. So stay tuned, and that's going to be it for this preview episode. I hope you all enjoy your weekend of college football. It's going to be another good one with some intriguing matchups, not necessarily the ranked matchups we saw last weekend, but some things could go in a lot of different directions, and it's always interesting to see these teams take the field. So hopefully you all enjoy it. And Leif, do you have anything else to add before we say goodbye?
Yeah, no, I think just as always, reach out to us. And now that we're doing basketball and football, please let us know if you have any basketball matchups that you want us to preview for Feast Week coming up, or any games as we go along. And do the same with football, of course. And so I just wanted to make sure you guys know that we're not dead set on previewing just the marquee matchups. We'll cover anything. We love these things. So it's our pleasure to bring it to you. Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, everyone. And we will see you on Sunday to recap what took place this weekend, and hopefully you all enjoy it. All right, everyone. Have a great rest of your evening. Take care.